of powers. When you have too much power in any place, it's corrupting. And they were more concerned about governmental power, but I think corporate power right now is overtaking governmental power. And with the campaign financing the way it is, they pretty much own the government now anyway. And so until we can deal with those more root causes, it's very hard to modulate that behavior, because from the standpoint of a public company, they're just trying to increase their shareholder value, which means let's sell more of our food around the world to people, and because they're not held accountable for the consequences of that. I mean, even at McDonald's, I was able to get them to put a, and I got a lot of flack for working with McDonald's, but I figured, you know, you got to go into the belly of the beast, and even incremental change on that level is worth doing. And I thought, so we got them to put a fruit and walnut salad on the menu. I figured, okay, so that'll make it good. And it was good. It had like 14 kinds of lettuce and edamame and all kinds of good stuff in there. But because of the perverse subsidies with the agriculture industry, the salad was $6.95, the burger's 99 cents. So if you're on a fixed income, you get a lot more calories for your buck by eating junk food, because the food doesn't price into it the real cost of it. And so it's a more complex issue than saying, well, let's just make it easier for people to walk. Those are good things. But I think if we really want to be serious about this, we have to go back even further into what really motivates and incentivizes healthy behavior and unhealthy behavior, even on a corporate level.
Okay. I think Jillian had something to respond to that, and then I would also ask after that if Daryl and Jean have anything to add.
Sure. I was just going to also point out something that we're learning a lot about in San Francisco, which is about food trucks. I think that you can look to zoning and you can look to placemaking in environments to provide interesting choices, and people will decide with their feet. I mean, it's pretty well documented that there are very few things that people will actively walk for, but one of them is food, and we know that people will walk about half a mile for food. So you can probably think of all sorts of food deserts. So walk a mile for a pack of camels. Okay, I stand corrected. But so those two things. But we realized that our zoning was so restrictive and it was so expensive to start a business in San Francisco that in many industries we're basically pricing out low-income communities, women, and the young. So we actively promoted a food truck permit as a less expensive business and a more attractive option. And we are using some of our nonprofit partners to promote healthy food truck options. And if you've been around San Francisco, around off-the-grid events, it is incredibly popular. And it is now this niche thing to start a food truck, and many of them offer significantly more healthy options. And they're killing the Taco Bell in my neighborhood went out of business, so.
Jillian, I'm glad you actually, I think, brought up the issue of use of zoning, because I think what this demonstrates, is the comprehensive approach that we need to take. There's clearly things to do at the federal policy level with agricultural policy and agricultural subsidies. There are clearly things that individuals, through their own awareness and the choices that they make, are important. The question, I think, is, how do we also support those individuals and the choices that... Actually, I think we know that many people want to make these choices. If you look at the top New Year's resolutions every year, what are they? People want to stop smoking, they want to lose weight, they want to eat better, they want to exercise more. And yet, by the end of January, right, they've thrown up their arms in the air in despair because the environments that we live in make it so difficult to do that. Right? And so issues like zoning, are really important. There are jurisdictions in the U.S., like Detroit, that have actually, there are restrictions in terms of availability of fast food and other unhealthy food outlets within the immediate vicinity of schools, as an example, right? LA has put a moratorium on new fast food restaurants. And so there are zoning mechanisms and tools that can be utilized that are part of the arsenal, right? And it is this comprehensive approach that we need to take. And I think for you guys as designers, architects, urban designers, I mean, you play a very fundamental role in those design elements, potentially also in the planning elements that can really shape the environmental supports or barriers. Jean and Daryl, any comments to that question?
I think to the question of back to the public realm, it's what do we value collectively, not individually. And what's happened is that the loudest voice is making the policy decisions or making the PR decisions, and there's no public will anymore. And the secondary point is that we're trying to demonize one industry or one sector. We all play a role in this, actually, in the choices that we make. And what we're not talking about is balance. And on the obesity activity, outtake activity is equally as important as intake. And we're all talking about intake and not outtake. Kids used to be able to eat anything that they wanted, but they got activity. Now they're not getting activity, and we're really concerned about what they're eating. So we have to go back to this balance, balance, balance. From a kid's perspective, T. Barry Brazelton said, childhood has changed more in the last 5 years than it has the whole last century. And it's probably going to change more in the next 3 years than it has in the last 5. And I'm really concerned about how we reverse that, particularly not just here in the United States, but actually on a global scale. And what's that going to mean for our public values when we have kids growing up in a very different way without some of the support, emotion, loving, empathy that's needed to have a lifelong, fulfilling life?
Yeah. Jean?
From folks out there. No, I'm curious.
Okay, there are comments from the audience regarding this question, so let's open it up to the floor. Are you right there? I think we need a mic. Terrific.
This is more of a statement than a question. I think one of the first things that I would like to see as somebody who grew up in India is if people who are in healthcare and architects got together just in the building design, the moment you enter the main lobby, the first thing you see is a set of stairs.
Yeah.
When I first moved to the US, I always looked for the stairs because in an Indian context or any developing world context, they want people not to use the elevators, because it consumes energy.
Yes.
But the first thing you see is a set of stairs. It's very difficult to find the bank of elevators. Sorry, I keep saying lifts. Elevators in the building. So I think that would be great if that can change in any new buildings that are built. You have that sort of access. The second point is, again, responding from the developing world context. It's really nice to see that, as people living in a country where all these corporations have started and they're going out there in the world, what's very interesting is your KFC and McDonald's are actually at the middle income level affordability outside of the US. So it's really not poor people who have access to that kind of food. So you have an entire middle class which is consuming that kind of food, and it's directly related to the disposable income. Because even the local food is getting oilier, they use more butter. So the more wealthy you get, your consumption increases. It's really sort of the opposite end of the spectrum. So just a couple of comments.
Yeah.
Can I respond to that?
Sure, Dean, go ahead.
So I'm actually going to India tomorrow. I'm spending a week there, and we're dealing with some of these issues there. One of the things we haven't really talked about that directly relates to that is the community. That there's, in the last 20 years, not only has there been a change in the diet, but there's also been disruption of the social networks as people begin to urbanize and move away from their families. It used to be you'd have an extended family or even a nuclear, that you see regularly. Many people don't even have a nuclear family they see regularly. They don't have a neighborhood where you have 2 or 3 generations of people. They don't have a church or synagogue they go to regularly. And so we know that these things affect the quality of life. They actually affect our survival. First of all, studies have shown that people who are lonely and isolated are 3 to 10 times more likely to get sick and die prematurely from all causes than those who have a sense of love and connection and community. And second, Nicholas Christakis showed that if your friends are obese, you're 45% more likely to be obese. If your friends' friends are obese, it's 25%. And if it's your friends' friends' friends, it's 10% more likely, even if you've never met them. That's how interconnected we are. And it's not just obesity, it's pretty much everything. So in terms of design, I like what you were saying about having people swing together, not in that sense, but, because that's healing. Even the word healing comes from the root to make whole, yoga, to yoke, to unite, to bring together. These are very old ideas. And so let's not just think, let's broaden our thinking about design beyond just how do we get people to exercise more, but how do we get people to be together more in loving, supportive community ways?
Actually, I think, Dean, you raise a very interesting comments that actually segue nicely into a second question that I have, which is around neighborhood environments and people and cultural environments and this whole issue of community engagement, right? How do the two relate to each other and then to health as well? So, if the panel can speak a little bit to the interplay of the two issues, right? Our environments in our community and community engagement issues, and the role of each in shaping the other. And I know that there's a hand back there. I won't forget you. We'll come back to you.
Sure. I'd like to talk briefly about work we've been doing with our communities for the last 8 years, and we've been working to support healthy eating, active living in a series of communities through collaboratives who are working with the schools and with government and with community-based organizations. And we were very focused on what they needed to do to advocate for sustainable changes to make it easier for people to eat better and to move more. And what they said was, after 7 years, this is nice, we're very concerned with obesity, we're concerned with having joint use opportunities at the schools, but we really can't pay attention to this in Richmond, California, when there is such a pervasive safety issue and a fear and a very legitimate fear that folks cannot be active in their parks, they can't walk to their schools. And so we had to listen to our communities and look very carefully at the intersection of safe places, community violence, and this connection to healthy eating, active living. So that's the work we're doing now, is supporting our communities to be able to tell us what's important and to support them as they gain the skills to advocate on their own behalf.
Thank you.
I think behavior change happens in the context of relationships, and the point being is that we're having more online relationships and less real-world relationships. So in the context of listening to the community's got to be your neighbor and your neighbor's neighbor. And how does the built environment help encourage socialization around sidewalks? We know in Portland they don't just build the ADA accessible sidewalks of 42 inches, but 8-foot sidewalks, because it is 5 people can walk hand in hand together, and you see lots of people out and about doing it, and bicycle riding and things like that. That's the context of relationship, not just the simple form of building larger sidewalks for the purpose of it's novel to have a larger sidewalk.
Jillian, comments?
I guess I would say that sort of a tack that we're taking here in San Francisco is that we learned a lot from Hurricane Katrina in New Orleans. We sent a contingency down to New Orleans afterwards, and the thing that shocked us the most was that the neighborhoods that didn't have any capacity in them, that is, they didn't have neighborhood associations or merchants associations, had the decisions about whether or not to be rebuilt or how to be rebuilt made by the federal government rather than by those neighborhoods. So that's a pretty important lesson for us to learn here in San Francisco, where we're very vulnerable to earthquakes. We're overdue, and we also have one of the most transient cities in the country. So we've undertaken a series of initiatives called Invest in Neighborhoods, and there's the Neighborhood Empowerment Network, where it's kind of known that there's a pyramid of engagement that people will come out of their apartments to meet their neighbors in certain neighborhoods for certain kinds of things, but not for others. But you can kind of begin engaging them at the lower tier and then build as you go. So I'll give you an example of what we did in my neighborhood, where my street used to have a streetcar on it, which we then ripped out because GM tried to sell us buses. So we ripped out our streetcars, widened the streets, cut back the sidewalks, and so the street that I live on is called a primary arterial, and it hooks to a freeway. And so we're not allowed to have a block party because we have to keep the street open for all the cars that go onto the freeway. And so nobody on the neighborhood knows each other because you can't cross the street. So we decided...
I've been studying blocked arteries also.
Yeah, right, exactly, blocked arteries.
See, it's all linked.
So it is all linked. And so we decided that we did a little bit of surveying of the neighborhood and tried to find out what was interesting to folks. And it turned out that greenery was something that people really liked. Like, why isn't it green? We want more street trees. So we decided to fundraise in the neighborhood and rip out the concrete medians in the middle of the street and plant them. And we did it as a neighborhood thing and not as a city-driven thing. So each neighborhood, each block had to raise $6,000. And then when we did a planting, we would circulate the date and do a lot of community organizing and get as many people from the neighborhood out to plant the trees and the trees and the plants in the middle of their own street. And we closed 2 lanes of traffic, and we got local bands and to play during the planting, and we got local bakeries and stuff to donate food, and we did it like a block party because a block party is not legal on this street, right? So every time we did this, and we did we've now done 2 miles. It's like 12 different plantings, and every time you see people from across the street reach out and shake hands and say, I've seen you coming down your stairs or out of the window. Like, what's your name? And that's how you make contact. You got to start somewhere. But now we have people on each of these blocks that know each other, and they talk to each other, and so now we can kind of take them to the next level, which would be something like a neighborhood plan, or what kind of amenities are you missing in your neighborhood that would get you to spend more time with each other, that would get you to stay in San Francisco, and so on, and so on, and so on. It's not rocket science.
Does the audience, anyone in the audience have comments or any questions for the panel? This lady right there. Yeah. Microphones with you.
I was just wondering that in your work, if you're working with people who are deeply rooted in their ethnic communities, how you integrate that into your design to make sure that when they're using the space or the project that they feel like it's inviting to them. But also if there are aspects of that that discourage them from connecting to health access. So I don't know if that's confusing, the last part, but because of their cultural connections that
so is your question for the panel?
Health, yeah.
Yeah, for the panel? Okay. Jean?
Yeah, what occurs to me is that we need to work with the folks who are in our neighborhoods. And so, in Modesto, in the Central Valley, we are supporting a community-based collaborative, which has a mixture of a federally qualified health center, there's Spanish-speaking folks. What their big issue actually had to do, which was very interesting to me, was the lack of, that they have dogs who are running around, So it's very locally driven. And I guess I think that that's the most important thing, is to do enough homework and literally on the ground, that you can kind of assess who needs to be at the table and their ability to bring other folks. And my experience, at least in Northern California, is that there are federally qualified health centers, there are grassroots organizations, and now with Obamacare, we have the ability to do outreach to get people enrolled and significantly expand their access to healthcare services. So I think, I will put a plug, I do think it's a really great opportunity, but in order to make that happen, people do have to feel connected.
It's an exciting element from a playground perspective because, we've worked with the former First Lady of California here to do 35 Cesar Chavez parks. Every single one of them really honored the heritage of Cesar Chavez that helps educate a new generation about what he fought for so that they can continue to fight for it. They not only have the play apparatuses, but they actually have community gardens, and the community gardens is not for consumption. They're at marketplaces, so they become micro-entrepreneurs, and we found that they work harder to sell more than what they will actually make and produce for themselves, so that they can buy stuff. We've done a Kwanzaa playground in Columbus, Ohio. We've had lots of murals and artists come out of it that really tell the history of the Pilsen neighborhood in Chicago. It's a great way to get people involved in the cultural context at which they exist and try to parlay it into the future.
Others on the panel? Any other comments? Jillian?
I guess I would say, in San Francisco, because the cost of housing, it's one of the least affordable cities in the country, there's enormous concern about whether people can continue to afford to live in this city. So we are very mindful when we do projects here they have to be community driven and they have to be community centric. And you're in the doghouse in City Hall if you don't figure out who the mayor is on every block, right? There's always, it has to be driven by the community, and you have to find out on every block there's a mayor or there's two mayors, and if there's not, there's a church. You have to figure out how to get those people involved, and sometimes what you want them to get involved in is not necessarily the most critical thing that they're involved in. Certainly in streetscape or traffic calming projects, somebody will say, well, I don't care. I need a job. Like, why should I care? But, when you meet your neighbors, you form a network that, and heightening those existing networks to bring resources and find out what the issues are is field work. You got to do good field work, and you got to do it in the languages that are meaningful to that community. If you're doing it just in English or, just in Spanish, you're going to fail. You have to be culturally sensitive.
I was just going to add that I think, if you look at organizations now that are doing work to, for example, build playgrounds like Kaboom or, community engagement is a big part of that process as a part of the building of the playground. So, they don't just go in there and put up a playground. Community engagement piece is really important. In New York, we have run over the last couple of years community engagement sessions that actually focus on particular neighborhood areas that need built environment improvements, and actually engage community residents, community groups, local businesses in thinking through what aspects of that community would they like change that could actually concomitantly improve multiple outcomes for that community, including active transportation, active recreation, healthy food and beverage access, and active buildings as a part of that process. And just a tremendous response in the workshop that we've run in New York.
And if I can just add on though, the point being made is that is it good for one person or the whole community? And I had an experience where the neighborhood association was going to go to city council and ask them not to give us the building permit to build the playground because the architect, frankly, was not chosen to design it. And so he was the head of the association, and he was miffed, and he wanted to fight against it. And so he said, nobody in the community asked for this. So over a weekend, we went door to door to door to door and got a lot of people who said they want this project to happen. And on Monday morning, again, over a weekend, 150 people showed up at city council. They got that permit, and not only that, every person on the citizen association 4 months later was voted out because there were people who were making choices for them that were not representing them, and they had to stand up and participate and show up and participate, not sign a pledge on an online petition and adjudicate the responsibility to somebody else.
Okay, we have about 5 minutes left in this session, so I want to see if there are other questions out there in the audience. Sir? The mic's coming.
Oh, sorry.
Thank you, sir.
It's very encouraging to hear you all. I come from Connecticut, and I would like to know how do you make we live between the two cities, small cities, and the initial road between the two, which was lined with trees on the center divider, was replaced with what they call is Jersey barriers. And now that, how do we reverse that? It is because we can see that all the wildlife going across all go up to the Jersey Drive and die there because of they can't go across. And of course, the people can't go across, and they have to almost go 2 miles round trip to be able to get to each other or meet the community. And so if you have too strong government, and you are in between the table, it's very hard to convince both the ends to say that, okay, we don't need it. They are more concerned about the traffic between the two towns.
I think this is actually really interesting, right? Because there's this perception out there that, the way to actually address traffic congestion issues is to actually build more road space for cars. And in fact, I don't think that's what we see in cities that build more road space for cars, right? So they build more highway and it just fills up with more cars, right? If you look at the cities that have actually managed to reverse traffic congestion, places like New York, probably the case in San Francisco, they are actually cities that have provided accessible, affordable, convenient alternate modes to the car. That's what causes a percentage of the population initially to shift, to try these modes, right? And as they do it, other people start to do it as part of the cultural shift, right? And before you know it, you have fewer cars on the road. And so, I think that there is this perception out there that is a misperception that we actually have to start to deal with head on, right? So I don't know if anyone has comments or answers for the gentleman.
Well, I guess I would say if you want to do something about it, my suggestion would be to try to relate it to the economies of the two places that you're talking about. I mean, I think that it's no accident that San Francisco's economy is booming compared to the rest of the country. And a lot of that, I mean, the reason that in my bio I put that I came here in the first tech boom was that when I came here in '97, I lived in the city because I'm a city person, and I drove down to Palo Alto every day, and I did that for 3 years, and I thought, my God, never again. I mean, it's like every 2 hours each way is completely wasted time. And this time around, what's happened is the Google bus phenomenon that's made the press. The Google is now the 7th largest transit provider, in the Bay Area because lesson learned from the first tech boom was you can actually get more employees. In the tech sector, your asset is your employees. You have to make them happy. Guess what? They don't want to drive. They want to live in San Francisco, which is a place worth living in, which is a place worth spending your time in when you're not working. So the companies are providing transit to the jobs. And in fact, now we're finding that the companies are actually expanding their job base in San Francisco rather than in the big campuses next to freeways, which is the way we used to think that you needed to grow jobs that way. So it's, community and placemaking, we've kind of been hovering around that. It's a healthy, you have to do all of these things at once. You have to, places worth being are places that people are places that people want to be in. It's not rocket science.
Yeah, there is more and more data that the economics of communities are actually shaped by issues like walkability and access to transit and issues like that. So even in New York, right, where we've actually improved the pedestrian realm through pedestrian plazas, those areas have seen increases in retail sales, right? Times Square was never in the top 10 retail areas in the world, and now it is post-pedestrianization.
Right, and the inverse of that is, there's a John Norquist from the College of New Urbanism maintains the sort of list of freeways that need to die, and his favorite joke is that, if the point of mobility is congestion relief, then Detroit is the perfect city because they've relieved all of the congestion.
Okay, guys, I've been given the sign that we need to stop. I think our panelists will be milling about for a little bit, so if you have some burning questions, you can also come up after the session. Oh, we're going to do a breakout session right out there. So follow us if you have further questions. Thank you.